Some winters do not begin with snow. They begin with a door closing behind a woman who has nowhere else to stand, or with the sound of a stomach too empty to be ashamed of itself anymore. A body can carry pride a long way, even over frozen ground, but hunger has a way of making every mile honest. I have seen strong men bow beneath weather, and I have seen quiet women rise under it like fence posts after a thaw. This is a story from the Oregon Trail country in the winter of 1880, when one mountain road nearly buried a woman, and one lonely cowboy learned that saving a life can change the shape of his own. Inez Hawthorne was moving because if she stopped, she would die. Snow came sideways across the old Barlow Road east of Oregon City, cutting the pine shadows into white strips and filling the wagon ruts until the road looked less like a road than a scar the mountains had decided to hide. Her boots had split at the seams 2 miles back. Her brown skirt was frozen hard around the hem. In one numb hand she clutched a cracked blue sugar bowl wrapped in a flour sack, the only thing she had refused to sell, though there had not been sugar in it for weeks. She stumbled past a leaning mileboard half buried in snow, took 3 more steps, and sank to one knee. Her breath came thin. Her stomach cramped so sharply she pressed the sugar bowl against her middle like it might hold her together. She had eaten nothing since a heel of bread the morning before, and that had been shared with a stray dog behind the blacksmith's shed in Mama. Her lips were split, her fingers trembled too badly to make a fist. Ahead, through the curtain of snow, a lantern moved. Inez tried to rise. Pride told her to stand when a stranger found her. Hunger told her the truth. The lantern swung closer, yellow and dim, and then a horse snorted in the storm. A man's voice cut through the wind. "Ma'am?" She turned her face toward him, but the snow blurred him into a dark coat, a hat brim, and shoulders broad enough to block part of the weather. "I am not begging," she whispered, though she did not know why those were the first words he chose. The man stepped down from his horse. "No one said you were." He came near slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal, and crouched in the snow before her. His beard was dark with ice. His eyes were gray, watchful, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with weather. "What's your name?" She looked at the sugar bowl in her hand, then back at him. "Inez Hawthorne. Inez Hawthorne," he repeated, like a name mattered even in a storm. "I'm Benjamin Hale. Can you stand?" She meant to say yes. What left her mouth was a sound so small the wind took half of it. Benjamin looked once at her boots, once at her shaking hands, and took off his coat. "Don't," she said. He laid it over her shoulders anyway. "Argue when you've got fire in you. Before we go farther, tell me where you're listening from tonight. If this story finds a warm place in you, give it a like, share it with someone who loves frontier tales, and subscribe for more quiet Western romance. Now let's step back into the snow with Inez and Benjamin. The coat smelled of horse, wood smoke, and cold leather. Inez hated the mercy of it. She hated how quickly her body leaned into warmth, even while her mind stood back with its arms crossed. Benjamin picked up the sugar bowl where it had slipped from her hand. He noticed the crack mended along one side with yellowed glue, but he did not ask about it. He tucked it inside his saddlebag, as carefully as if it had been silver. Then he lifted Inez. She stiffened at once. "Put me down." "Can't," I said. "Put me down." "And I heard you." His voice held no anger. That made it worse somehow. Cruelty, she understood. Pity made her feel naked. He set her across the saddle in front of him, climbed up behind, and turned the horse toward a trail that vanished between snow-loaded firs. Inez tried to keep her head up, but the storm pressed hard. Benjamin kept one arm around her without pulling her too close, his gloved hand resting against the saddle horn. Every few minutes he asked, "Still with me?" "For the first mile," she answered. For the second, she only nodded. By the third, the world narrowed to the horse's body beneath her, the creak of leather, and Benjamin's breath near her ear as he urged the animal through drifts. Once the horse slipped on hidden rock, Benjamin's arm tightened around her, strong and immediate. She felt the jolt in his chest, but he made no sound except a low, steady, easy Solomon. The trail climbed above Laurel Creek and turned toward a small spread tucked between a stand of fir and a slope of white meadow. A barn leaned against the wind. A cabin crouched low beneath a roof buried in snow. Smoke came from the chimney, thin but real. Inez saw the smoke and began to cry without knowing she had given herself permission. Benjamin did not mention it. He brought the horse close to the cabin door, dismounted, and carried her inside. The first thing Inez noticed was the stove, black iron, dented at the door, breathing a red glow through its seams. The second was the table, rough pine, one chair pushed back, a tin cup turned over on its side, a plate with old beans dried along the rim. The room was not dirty from laziness. It was dirty from a man who came in too tired to care whether he ate standing or sitting, whether the coffee boiled bitter, whether a shirt dried stiff on the back of a chair. Benjamin set her in the chair nearest the stove. "Hands out," he said. She tucked them beneath the coat. "They are mine. They'll stay yours longer if we warm them slow." He knelt and took one hand gently, not gripping the fingers, only supporting them. Her skin looked white and waxy from cold. He pulled a basin from beneath the shelf, poured in cool water from a bucket, and eased her fingers into it. Inez hissed and tried to pull away. "Slow," he said. "Too much heat too fast, I'll hurt worse." "I know that." His eyes flicked up. She looked away. "My father trapped winters in the blues." Benjamin did not ask where her father was now. He set a kettle on the stove, then cut a slice from a brown loaf wrapped in cloth. It was not fresh. It was hard along the edge. To Inez it looked like a feast laid before a queen. He placed it on the table without ceremony. "It's small." She stared at it. He turned his back, busying himself with the kettle. That kindness almost undid her. Not the bread, not the coat, not the fire, but the way he refused to watch hunger make her humble. Inez broke off a piece and put it into her mouth. The bread was coarse and sour, made with starter that had seen better days, but she tasted wheat and salt and the faint smoke of the oven. Her throat tightened around it. She swallowed too quickly and coughed. Benjamin poured water into the tin cup and set it beside her. "Slow," he said again. "You say that often?" "Only when someone's trying to outrun pain." She lifted the cup with both hands and drank. Some spilled down her wrist. She was ashamed of that too. Benjamin took off his hat and hung it on a peg. His hair was dark, flattened from the brim, with a streak of white near one temple that looked out of place on a man not yet old. He moved carefully in his own house, as though trying not to wake something. A small sound came from the back room. Inez froze. Benjamin went still, then looked toward the door. "Ruth!" The door opened the width of a hand. A girl of perhaps 7 stood barefoot in a nightdress too short at the ankles, her brown hair braided crookedly. One hand clutched a rag doll by the leg. She looked at Ina with solemn suspicion. "Storm brought someone," Benjamin said. The girl's eyes went to Inez's wet skirt, then to the bread in her hand. "I asked, she sick? Cold and hungry." Ruth stepped into the room. "Aunt Lydia said hungry people steal." Benjamin's jaw shifted. "Aunt Lydia says too much." Inez lowered the bread. "Sometimes hungry people do steal," she said quietly. "Sometimes they do not. Tonight I was too tired to be dangerous." Ruth studied this with the grave judgment of children who have heard too much adult sorrow. Then she crossed the floor and laid the rag doll on the table near Inez's elbow. "She can sit with you." Benjamin looked at the girl, and something raw moved across his face before he hid it. "Back to bed, Ruth." "She's shivering." "I know. You shiver when you have the dream." His hand closed around the chair back. "Bed." Ruth picked up the doll again, hesitated, and left it on the table. Then she returned to the room and shut the door. Inez kept her eyes on the bread. She knew a grief room when she sat in one. Benjamin poured coffee from a pot that had been warming too long. The smell was dark, bitter, and blessed. He poured a little into a cup, thinned it with hot water, and set it before her. "I can't pay," Inez said, because the words had been waiting like guards at the gate. "With what?" She lifted her chin. "Work." He leaned back against the shelf. "You need sleep. I need not be a charity case." No. The simple word unsettled her more than a lecture would have. He crossed to a trunk near the far wall and took out a folded blanket. As he lifted it, a small thing fell to the floor, a woman's hair comb, tortoiseshell, missing 3 teeth. Benjamin stared at it. Inez saw the way the room changed. The stove still ticked, the wind still pressed at the chinking. But Benjamin Hale had gone somewhere else, somewhere colder than the storm outside. He picked up the comb and placed it on the shelf above the stove, without looking at Inez. "You can have the bed in Ruth's room. She won't mind sharing once she's asleep. I can sleep by the stove. You'll have the bed, Mr. Hale." "Benjamin," his voice was rougher now. "And don't make me argue with a starving woman." She wanted to smile, but her face had forgotten how. He gave her one of his shirts, a pair of wool stockings that had been mended many times, and pointed her toward the back room. Ruth was already curled beneath a quilt, the rag doll under one arm, though her eyes were open. "You can sleep on that side," Ruth whispered. Inez changed with slow, painful hands and slid into the narrow bed. The sheets smelled of lye soap and cedar chips. Ruth watched her from the pillow. "Are you married?" the child asked. "No." "Are you a widow?" "No." "Do you have children?" Inez looked toward the wall where frost feathered the window glass. "No." "Then who belongs to you?" The question entered soft and struck hard. Inez closed her eyes. "No one just now." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then her small hand found Inez's sleeve in the dark and held it, not lovingly, not yet, only as if testing whether the stranger might vanish. Inez lay stiff until the girl slept. Then she turned her face into the pillow and breathed through the ache of being warm. In the morning, snow still fell. Inez worked to the sound of wood splitting outside and the smell of coffee trying its best to be decent. Her limbs ached as if she had been beaten. Her stomach had sharpened itself overnight. She sat up too fast, dizzy, then steadied herself on the bed frame. Ruth was gone. On the chair beside the bed lay Inez's skirt, dried but stiff, and Benjamin's coat, brushed clean of snow. Her sugar bowl sat on the windowsill, unbroken. Inez dressed and stepped into the front room. Benjamin stood at the stove with his sleeves rolled to the forearms, attempting biscuits with the expression of a man repairing a wheel in the dark. Flour dusted one side of his shirt. Ruth sat at the table, solemnly picking burnt bits from yesterday's beans. Inez watched him press dough too hard. "You'll make stones that way," she said. Benjamin looked over his shoulder. "Morning, that dough is angry." Ruth giggled once, then covered her mouth. Benjamin looked at the dough, then at his hands. "It has cause." Inez came forward. He stepped aside at once, which surprised her. Men who lived alone often guarded their ways, especially bad ones. She washed her hands in the basin, took the dough, and folded it lightly. The flour felt good beneath her palms, simple, honest. She added a spoon of grease from the crock, a pinch more salt, and worked the mixture until it softened. She found a cracked cup, cut rounds, and laid them in the skillet. Benjamin watched without speaking. Ruth leaned her elbows on the table. "You know biscuits?" "I know hunger," Inez said. "It teaches a person not to insult flour." The words came out sharper than she intended. Benjamin's gaze moved to her face, then away, giving her the mercy of not asking. The biscuits rose unevenly but tender. Inez scraped the beans into a pan with onion and a little coffee to loosen them. She found 2 eggs, one cracked, and fried them for Ruth and Benjamin. For herself, she took the smallest biscuit and broke it slow. Benjamin noticed. He put half his egg onto her plate. She stiffened. "No, trade me beans. I did not earn an egg. You made breakfast edible. That's worth more than an egg in this house." Ruth pushed a bite around, her plate. Uncle Ben burns everything when the weather's bad. Ruth, it is true. Inez looked at Benjamin and saw the faintest edge of embarrassment under his beard. Not anger, not pride wounded beyond repair. Just a man caught by a child's plain speech. She ate the egg. The day stayed white and close. Benjamin went out to check the stock, and Inez cleaned the kitchen because her hands could not bear to be idle. She washed every dish in water heated on the stove, scraping old grease with sand until the plates showed their true color. She shook crumbs from the table cracks, wiped the shelf, found a jar of dried apples, and set them to soak. She did not move the tortoise-shell calm. Ruth followed her from corner to corner. Do you always clean strangers' houses? Only when I am too weak to chop wood. Can you chop wood, Inez? Can you shoot a little? Can you sew, Inez? Yes. Ruth's eyes brightened. Uncle Ben reads the Bible slow and skips name. Most people skip names. Mama did not. There it was, small as a splinter, deep as bone. Inez set the cup on the shelf. Your mama must have been patient. She was pretty. I expect she was more than that. Ruth considered Inez with new respect. She made curtains. Inez looked around. The windows had no curtains, only flour sacks tacked up against drafts. On the wall near the stove, 2 nails stood empty where something had once hung. Benjamin came in at noon with snow on his shoulders and worry in his boots. South fence is down. Drifts took it. If the wind shifts, cattle might push toward the creek. Can I help? Inez asked. You can rest. I have rested. You were half dead last night. Only half. Ruth grinned. Benjamin did not. No, the word struck too near last night's. Mercy. Inez straightened. I said I could work. I meant it. You can work when your hands stop shaking. She held them out. They shook. Betrayal by her own body. Benjamin softened, though he tried to hide it. There's mending in the basket. Ruth has stockings with more holes than wool. That would help. Mending. Women's work, some would say, as if it carried no weight. Inez knew better. A sock mended well meant a child's foot stayed dry. A shirt patched meant a man could work one more winter. A seam held meant dignity held with it. I can do that, she said. He nodded, pulled his gloves back on, and left. By evening, Ruth's stockings were mended. Benjamin's work shirt had 2 new patches, and the cabin smelled of dried apple stew with cinnamon, shaved from a sliver Inez found wrapped in paper at the back of a tin. The storm had worsened. Benjamin returned after dark, carrying a coil of frozen rope and moving with a limp he pretended not to have. Inez saw blood on his sleeve. Sit, she said. He shut the door against the wind. It's nothing. Sit. Ruth looked from one adult to the other, delighted by the reversal. Benjamin sat. Inez brought the basin, clean cloth, and a little bottle of carbolic she had found near the shelf. He had cut his forearm on wire, not deep but dirty. She rolled his sleeve carefully. You've done this before, he said. My mother took in washing and wounds. Men came to our door after meal accidents, logging accidents, knife arguments. She said blood was less frightening once you had a task. Benjamin watched her clean the cut. Where is she? Inez tied the bandage. Buried outside Walla Walla. And your father. Before her, he did not say he was sorry. Instead, he said, that leaves a hard road. She looked up. Nothing more. It was the first honest thing between them. On the 3rd day, the snow eased enough for Benjamin to hitch a team and take a short load of highs toward Mama. Inez expected him to tell her she must go with him, to leave her at the church or the hotel kitchen, anywhere not his concern. Instead, he stood by the door after breakfast, with his hat in both hands. I'll be gone most of the day, he said. You and Ruth stay close to the cabin. Woodpiles by the lean-to, but don't strain yourself. Inez wiped the table. You are leaving me in your house? You planning to carry it off? She looked at him sharply. His mouth tightened. Bad joke, Russ. He nodded once. I'm out of practice with people. That disarmed her. So did the way Ruth stood beside him, trying not to look afraid of his leaving. I will keep the stove fed, Inez said. Benjamin looked at the stove, then at the girl, then at Inez. I'll bring flour if Beecham has any. Ruth tugged his sleeve. And molasses. The price hasn't grown teeth. After he left, the cabin fell into the hush of women's work. Inez washed the bedding and hung it near the stove. She swept beneath the bed, cleaned soot from the lamp chimney, and found behind the trunk a folded pair of curtains, faded blue, stiff with time. Ruth stood very still when Inez lifted them. Those are Mama's. I won't hang them unless you want. Ruth touched one edge. Uncle Ben put them away after the fever. The fever? Ruth nodded. Mama coughed until she got thin. Papa went for the doctor and the bridge broke. Uncle Ben brought me here. Then Mama went to heaven. Papa did too. Inez held the curtains, feeling the thin cotton between her fingers. That is a great deal for one little girl. Ruth's mouth trembled. But she did not cry. Frontier children often learned early that tears did not bring wood in or bread up from flour. I forgot her voice. Ruth whispered. Inez sat on the trunk. Maybe the curtains remember it. Ruth frowned. Curtains can't remember. No, but hands do. She hemmed these. She chose this blue. She wanted morning light to come through them. That tells you something of her. Ruth touched the hem again. She liked morning. By the time Benjamin came home, the blue curtains were at the windows. The room had changed, not much perhaps to anyone else, but the light from the snow came through faded blue cotton and softened the walls. The stove looked less alone. The table looked as if someone might sit there for reasons beyond hunger. Benjamin stepped inside carrying flour, salt pork, coffee, and a small jug of molasses. His eyes went straight to the curtains. Ruth froze. Inez held her breath. Benjamin set the sack down slowly. He looked at the curtains for so long, the room seemed to stop breathing. Then he took off his hat. Your mama always said the place looked like a trapper's shed without them. Ruth ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. Benjamin closed one hand over her hair and looked at Inez. His face held pain. Yes, but not accusation. Thank you, he said. It was the first thing he gave her that was not food, warmth, or shelter. It was trust. That night, after Ruth slept, Inez sat by the stove, darning a glove. Benjamin carved a new handle for the stove lifter, his knife moving slow, shavings falling near his boot. Outside, tar began to drip from the eaves, though the coal still held the ground. Beecham asked after you, Benjamin said. Inez needle paused. The storekeeper, said a woman matching your description, came through town 2 days ago. Said you owed for a loaf and a spool of thread. I paid for the thread. He said you didn't. I paid with my mother's thimble. Benjamin's knife stalked. Inez kept her eyes on the glove. It was silver, worth more than thread. He knew that. Did you take the loaf? She pushed the needle through wool. Yes. Silence settled, not soft. Why? He asked. She could have lied. A practiced lie was easy. She had carried several since childhood for men who asked questions only to enjoy the answer's shame. But Benjamin's voice had no hunger for her humiliation. There was a boy outside the freight shed, she said. Not mine. His mother was sick in a wagon. He was eating snow. I gave him the loaf. Benjamin leaned back. And you didn't tell Beecham? I did. He said charity is best done with another man's bread. Then he told me to work it off in his kitchen. I said I would. His son cornered me by the flour barrels after dark. I hit him with a stove poker and left. Benjamin's hand tightened around the knife. I did not rob him, Inez said, but I did steal bread. The stove ticked. Outside, ice fell from the roof and broke near the step. At last Benjamin said, "A stolen loaf doesn't weigh the same in every hand." She looked at him then. It was not forgiveness. It was not permission. It was something better. He had heard the whole thing and not made himself the judge of it. "Beecham will talk," she said. "He already does. You should take me to town, not tonight. Tomorrow then." Benjamin set the half-carved handle on the floor. "Where would you go?" "Somewhere that is not your trouble." His gray eyes lifted. "That's not a place." The words stayed with her long after the lamp was blown out. The thaw lasted 2 days. Then rain came cold and hard. Snow turned to gray slush. The yard became a churn of mud, deep enough to steal a boot. Benjamin worked from before dawn until dark, clearing drainage trenches, resetting fence posts, hauling feed to cattle that bawled at the weather. Inez grew stronger by chores, not all at once. She still tired quickly, but each day her hands steadied. She learned the rhythm of the Hale place, coffee before sunup, though she made it gentler than Benjamin did. Firewood stacked under the eave, Ruth's lessons at the table after breakfast, letters scratched on slate, Bible names read without skipping, bread on Mondays, beans soaked Wednesdays, salt pork stretched with onions, gravy made when there was enough flour, dirty dishes washed before they could gather into a mountain of despair. She mended harness, she boiled rags for bandages, she found a leak near the pantry and set a pan under it, then patched the roof from inside with tarred cloth, while Benjamin was away because she knew he would tell her not to climb. When he returned and saw the patch, he stared at it, then at her. "You climbed. The pantry is dry. You climbed. I used a ladder. That does not improve it. It improves the reach." Ruth laughed so hard, milk came out her nose. Benjamin wanted to be angry. Inez saw him try. Then he turned away, but not before she caught the reluctant lift at one corner of his mouth. The first time she heard him laugh, truly laugh, was over a ruined pie. Ruth had begged for apple pie after hearing that Inez once helped in a hotel kitchen in the Dalles. The dried apples were old, the lard scarce, and the stove uneven. The crust collapsed on one side and leaked black syrup into the pan. Inez stood over it with flour on her cheek, exhausted and near tears from the foolishness of wanting one thing to turn out lovely. Benjamin came in, took one look, and said, "Looks like the North Ridge after the slide." Ruth gasped. "Uncle Ben." Inez stared at him. Then Benjamin broke a piece of crust, burned his fingers, and put it in his mouth. "Good slide," he said. The laugh surprised her out of herself. It came rough, unfamiliar, and then Ruth laughed too, and Benjamin laughed quietly with them, standing in his muddy boots beside a stove that smoked at the wrong times. For a moment the cabin held something not exactly happiness, but its cousin. Then a knock came at the door. Benjamin's laughter ended as if cut. At the threshold stood Lydia Krause, Benjamin's sister by marriage, Ruth's aunt. She was a narrow woman in a black cloak with cheeks reddened by cold and eyes that moved quickly over everything. The curtains, the table, Inez, the pie, Ruth's flowery hands. "Benjamin," she said, "I heard you brought a woman here." Benjamin wiped his hands on a cloth. "I brought a freezing woman out of a storm, and kept her." Inez felt the old heat of public shame rise in her chest. Ruth moved closer to Inez. Lydia saw it and stiffened. "Ruth, get your shawl. You're coming with me for a few days." "No," Ruth said at once. "Do not be rude." Benjamin's voice lowered. "You can visit here. I will not leave my niece in a house with a vagrant." Inez set down the pie knife. The words struck, but not where it once had. She had washed dishes in this house. She had mended Ruth's stockings. She had kept the stove alive through nights when the wind would have frozen the wash water solid. Vagrant was a word that belonged to those who saw only torn hems and not the hands beneath them. Benjamin stepped between Lydia and Inez. It was subtle, but everyone saw it. Her name is Inez Hawthorne, he said. Lydia's mouth pinched. Beecham says she stole from him. Beecham's son has a bruise he's not explaining. Color shifted in Lydia's cheeks. That is not decent talk. No, Benjamin said. It wasn't decent behavior. Lydia looked at Inez. And you have persuaded him of your innocence, I suppose? Inez folded her hands to stop them from trembling. No, ma'am. I told him I took bread. Lydia looked triumphant. I also told him why. Need does not erase sin. No, Inez said. But it does reveal neighbors. The room went very still. Benjamin's eyes flicked to her, and something like admiration passed there before he faced Lydia again. Ruth stays, he said. Lydia drew herself up. Her mother would be ashamed. The blow landed in Benjamin's face. Ruth made a small sound. Inez did not think. She moved around Benjamin and knelt before Ruth, taking the child's cold hands. Look at me, she said softly. Ruth did, eyes wet. Your mother's curtains are hanging. Her girl is fed. Her lessons are done. Her stockings have no holes. Shame does not live here tonight. Benjamin turned toward the window, his shoulders rigid. Lydia looked as if she might speak again, but something in the room had closed against her. At last she left with her cloak snapping behind her. After the door shut, Benjamin stood unmoving. Ruth whispered, "Is Mama ashamed?" Benjamin crossed the room in 3 strides and went to his knees before her. He took her face in both hands. "No," he said. His voice broke on the single word, "never." Ruth began to cry then, hard and young, and Benjamin held her with a helplessness that hurt to watch. Inez turned to the stove and busied herself with coffee no one wanted, giving grief a room without staring at it. Later, when Ruth had cried herself to sleep, Benjamin stepped on to the porch. Rain hissed beyond the roofline. Inez followed with his coat. "You forgot this," she said. He looked at the coat in her hands. "I did." She held it out. He took it, but did not put it on. "Lydia loved her sister," he said. "I believe that. She never forgave me for living." The porch boards were slick under Inez's boots. Was there something to forgive? Benjamin looked toward the dark barn. For a long while, he said nothing. "My brother Thomas went for the doctor when Sarah worsened. I told him not to cross the creek at night. He went anyway. Bridge gave. Horse came home without him. Sarah died before dawn." He gripped the coat. Ruth slept through part of it, woke asking for water. "I was holding Sarah's hand and listening for Thomas's horse. That's all I remember clear." Inez stood beside him, close enough to feel the cold coming off his shirt. "The comb on the shelf?" she asked. "Sarah's? Ruth's mother?" He nodded. Rain tapped the porch roof, steady and indifferent. "I put everything away," he said. "Curtains, her shawl, the blue dishes. Thought if Ruth didn't see it, she wouldn't hurt." "And did that work?" "No." His answer was so plain she did not soften it for him. Inez leaned against the post. "After my mother died, my uncle sold her good kettle. Said sentiment could not make soup. He was right. But I would have liked to decide whether hunger got it or grief did." Benjamin looked at her. "There are things a house needs besides what keeps bodies alive," she said. He put the coat around his shoulders. "You know a lot about houses for someone with nowhere to go." The words were not meant cruelly. Still, they found a bruise. Inez stepped back. "Good night." He caught the mistake as soon as it landed. "Inez." She went inside. By morning, the rain had turned the road to mud, and the mud had brought Beecham. He came in a wagon with his son Caleb beside him, a broad young man with a purple mark fading along his jaw. Sheriff Ansel Pike rode behind them, looking unhappy to be in the weather, but obligated by office. Benjamin was in the barn when they arrived. Inez saw them through the blue curtain and knew the shape of trouble before it knocked. Ruth stood at her side. "Is it Aunt Lydia again?" "No," Inez said. "Go to the back room. I'm not little. Go anyway." Ruth obeyed slowly. Inez opened the door before Beecham could strike it. The storekeeper smiled with all his teeth and no warmth. Mrs. Hawthorne, Miss as you like. Sheriff Pike took off his hat. Morning, ma'am. Caleb Beecham looked at the floor. Benjamin came from the barn, crossing the yard in long, muddy stride. What business? Beecham lifted a paper. My business is with the thief you are harboring. Benjamin's face hardened. Careful. She took bread, thread, and assaulted my son. Inez gripped the door edge. Your son followed me into the storeroom and barred the door, Caleb muttered. Liar. Benjamin moved so fast Inez barely saw it. He did not strike Caleb. He simply stepped close enough that the younger man backed into the wagon wheel. Say it again, standing straight, Benjamin said. Sheriff Pike put a hand up. Easy, Ben. Beecham's smile thin. You always were led by strays. First that half-dead mare, now this. I have witnesses saw her take bread for a starving child, Inez said. For herself, more like. Benjamin turned to Inez. How much? What? What was the loaf worth? Beecham said. Theft is not settled by how much. The storekeeper's eyes glinted. With the thread, the trouble, and the insult to my family, $10. That loaf was 10 cents, Inez said. And reputation is dear. Benjamin went to the barn. When he returned, he carried a small iron cash box. Inez felt dread open beneath her ribs. No, she said. He ignored her and counted coins into Beecham's gloved hand. $10 in silver. Money, that mattered. Feed money, coffee money, money against winter. Beecham curled his fingers around it. A pleasure. Not done, Benjamin said. The storekeeper paused. Benjamin looked at Sheriff Pike. You heard her claim against Caleb. The sheriff shifted. I did. I want it noted. Beecham's smile vanished. Now see here. Benjamin's voice stayed calm. If her name is spoken in town, his is spoken beside it. Caleb flushed dark red. Sheriff Pike looked at Inez, then at Caleb, then at Beecham. I'll note it. Beecham climbed into the wagon with stiff fury. As they turned, he called back. There are debts coming due. Hail. Banks don't take in fallen women as payment. The wagon wheels cut through mud and disappeared into the trees. Inez stood in the doorway with cold hands. Benjamin closed the cash box. It sounded too light. You should not have paid him, she said. He came for your dignity. I bought his excuse and left him with none. With money you need. Money is for need. I will repay you. I didn't ask. That makes it worse. He looked at her then, weary and stubborn. Everything does with you. She flinched. He saw it. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Her voice shook, but she held it. You meant that I make help difficult, that I bite every hand before I know whether it will strike or feed. You are right, Inez. No, let truth have its chair at the table. She stepped back into the cabin. I know how I am. Ruth appeared in the back room doorway, pale and watchful. Inez hated that the child had heard. For the next week, Inez worked as if debt could be scrubbed out of boards. She rose before Benjamin and had coffee waiting. She baked bread until the cabin smelled warm even on bitter mornings. She made soap from ash and grease. She took the old ledger from the shelf, asked for every receipt Benjamin had, and began sorting the ranch accounts by lamplight. Benjamin found her one night with the ledger, his old bills, and the blue sugar bowl holding dull pencil stubs. What are you doing? Finding out how close you are to losing this place? His face changed. That is not your concern. You made it mine when you spent $10 on my name. He came to the table. I manage. No, you endure. That is different. The words landed hard because they were true. Benjamin stood behind the chair, jaw tight. Inez softened her voice. The banknote is due in 6 weeks. I know. You are short by $43 if cattle prices hold. More if they do not. Beecham knows. Benjamin looked at the ledger as if it had betrayed him. I can help, she said. With what? More biscuits? The moment he said it, regret crossed his face. But Inez had already closed the ledger. Forgive me, he said quietly. She gathered the papers. You are tired. That's no pardon. No. He sat across from her, elbows on knees, hands clasped. I don't like being seen failing. Inez looked at the cracked sugar bowl. Neither do I. He followed her gaze. Why keep that? She touched the rim. It was my mother's. We had little worth keeping. She used it every Sunday, even when there was no sugar. Said a table should remember sweetness. Benjamin said nothing, but his eyes did. Inez opened the ledger again. You have cedar on the north slope, good straight trees. Not enough to strip and ruin the land, but enough for posts. The Army road contracts pay for posts. I have no mill. You have a saw pit, 2 hands and a team. One of those hands nearly died 2 weeks ago. She is inconveniently alive now. He almost smiled. She tapped the ledger. Also, your hens lay more than you use. Ruth and I can sell eggs in town. I can take in mending. If we make preserves from dried apples, and what berries remain in the cellar, those sell to miners passing through. Her pencil stopped. The word had slipped. It sat between them, small and dangerous. Ruth, who had been pretending to sleep in the back room, whispered through the crack. Cry can wash eggs. Benjamin looked at the door. Inez looked down at the ledger, but a warmth had risen in her that no stove could explain. They began the next morning. Weather ruled every plan. Rain delayed the post-cutting. Ice made the creek crossing treacherous. A windstorm tore shingles from the smokehouse roof and forced Benjamin and Inez to work shoulder to shoulder in sleet, hammering tar paper with numb fingers, while Ruth handed nails from a tin cup. At night, they came in soaked and silent. Inez would stir beans with one hand and warm the coffee with the other. Benjamin would hang his coat by the door, then take it down and put it over Inez's shoulders if she stood too near a draft. She stopped handing it back every time. Their bargains became habits. He sharpened her kitchen knives without being asked. She left a covered plate for him when he came late from the barn. He brought in kindling split small enough for her hands. She learned he hated carrots but ate them without complaint when Ruth watched. He learned Inez took her coffee with a little molasses when there was any, and one morning a spoonful waited in her cup before she touched the pot. No one spoke of it. In town, people did. Marmot was 3 muddy streets, a church, a freight office, a blacksmith shop, Beecham's store, and enough tongues to stitch a scandal whole by supper. The first time Inez went with Ruth to sell eggs, women turned from the counter and looked her over from hat brim to boot seam. Beecham overcounted her change by 2 cents, then smiled when she corrected him, as if honesty were a trick she had performed for applause. Outside the store, Caleb Beecham leaned against a post. You carrying pokers today? Inez handed the egg basket to Ruth. No. Pity. Sheriff Pike, crossing the street, slowed. Caleb saw him and spat into the mud instead of speaking further. At the church sewing circle, Lydia Krause refused Inez's mending work, but watched the stitch she used on a torn cuff. Another woman, Mrs. Tiller, quietly asked if Inez could patch her husband's winter coat. By week's end, Inez had 4 coats, 3 shirts, and a pair of trousers to mend. She worked until lamplight blurred, earning nickels, then dimes, and once a whole $1 from a grateful freighter, whose sleeve she saved from ruin. Benjamin said little when she placed the coins in the sugar bowl, but the next day he built a small shelf by the table, just high enough that Ruth could not knock the bowl over. One evening in February, a letter came. The envelope was damp from the mail pouch, addressed in a hand Inez knew before she touched it. Her uncle, Silas Vane, had found her. She stood by the stove with the letter, unopened. Benjamin came in from feeding the horses and saw her face. Bad news? Old news? Wearing a new coat? She opened it with a kitchen knife. Silas Vane wrote that she had embarrassed the family, that she owed him for 3 years of shelter after her mother's death, that he had arranged respectable employment for her in Portland with a widowed hotel owner who would not ask too many questions, that she was to present herself by March 1st, or he would send men to collect what she had stolen. Benjamin listened as she read none of it aloud. At last he asked, "What does he want? To own what he never cared to love, can he?" She folded the letter. Men like him often can, not by law, by persistence. Benjamin held out his hand. "My eyes." She gave him the letter. He read it slowly. His eyes darkened. "You're not going." "I have not decided." "Eyes, you have. You just haven't admitted which way." She took the letter back. "If I stay, he might come here. If he comes here, he brings trouble. You have the bank, Beecham, Lydia, Winter, Ruth. You do not need my past at your door." Benjamin was quiet. The lack of answer hurt more than she expected. She told herself it was sensible. A man could pull a woman from snow and still not invite her storms to remain. That night she packed, not much fit in her flour sack, her mother's sugar bowl, one spare chemise Ruth had helped wash, a pair of stockings Benjamin had bought without comment, her sewing kit, the coins she had earned. She left the ledger balanced on the table, and the mended gloves by Benjamin's chair. Ruth woke as Inez folded the blue shawl she had been using. "Are you leaving?" Inez closed her eyes. "I? Because of Aunt Lydia." "No, because of Uncle Ben." "No, because of me." Inez turned sharply. "Never because of you." Ruth's face crumpled. "Mama left." The words were a child's wound, unreasonable and true. Inez crossed the room and knelt, gathering Ruth into her arms. "Your mama did not choose to leave, but you can choose." Inez held her tight. "Yes." Ruth pulled back. "Then choose here." Inez had no answer that would not break both their hearts a little. Before dawn, she rose. The cabin was dark except for embers in the stove. She moved quietly, wearing Benjamin's old coat, because he had not taken it back and because the cold beyond the door would punish pride. She placed the ledger in the center of the table, beside the sugar bowl. Then she changed her mind, picked up the bowl, held it against her chest, and turned toward the door. Benjamin sat in the chair beside it. She gasped. He had his hat on his knee and his boots laced. The lamp was unlit. He must have been waiting in the dark for some time. "Roads washed out by the creek," he said. She swallowed. "I can take the ridge trail. Snow cornice broke there yesterday." "Then I will wait." No, the word might have angered her if not for the way he said it. Not command. "Please shave down to bone." Inez tightened her grip on the sugar bowl. "I am trying not to cost you more." Benjamin stood. In the dim light, he looked older, not from years, but from everything he had already lost and expected to lose again. He reached past her, opened the door, and stepped outside. Cold rushed in. She followed before thinking. On the porch, half under the eave, sat the small wagon, hitched and ready. Blankets lay in the bed, a sack of food, a lantern, his rifle, Ruth's rag, doll tucked beside the flour sack. Inez stared. Benjamin came down the steps and lifted her flour sack from her hand. He set it in the wagon. "What are you doing?" "Driving you to wherever you decide." "I did not ask." "No, then why?" He looked at her, snow beginning to fall again between them, light and silent. "Because leaving alone nearly killed you once." The sentence was simple. It stopped the loss. Inez looked away, blinking hard. "If you take me, Ruth will wake afraid." "She is in the wagon." Inez turned. Ruth's head emerged from the blankets, hair wild, eyes stubborn. "I pack biscuits," Ruth said. Inez covered her mouth with one hand. Benjamin stepped closer, not touching her. I. If you choose Portland, we drive to the stage. If you choose elsewhere, we find the road. If you choose here, we unhitch. The mountain held its breath. Inez looked at the wagon, the child, the man who had prepared to lose a day, might be more. Not to keep her, but to make sure leaving did not become another kind of dying. Here, she whispered. Benjamin closed his eyes once. When he opened them, he only nodded. Ruth burst from the blankets and nearly fell climbing down. She ran to Inez and wrapped both arms around her waist. Benjamin unhitched the team without ceremony, as if no miracle had occurred before breakfast. But when he passed Inez on the way to the barn, his hand brushed hers. Neither of them pulled away. March came hard. The snow withdrew in dirty patches, revealing broken fence, winter-killed brush, and mud black enough to swallow wheels. Calves came early, two in a sleet storm that kept Benjamin and I in the barn all night. Ruth slept on a hay bale under a horse blanket, waking now and then to ask whether the spotted calf had lived. It did, because Inez would not let it go. She knelt in the straw, sleeves rolled, rubbing the calf with sacking, while Benjamin held the lantern. Her hair had fallen loose, damp at her temples. The calf shuddered, then lifted its head. Inez laughed under her breath, exhausted. Benjamin watched her as if the barn had become church. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing, Benjamin Hale. Do not say nothing when you are looking that loud." His mouth softened. "You fight for small lives? So do you?" "I used to." "You still do?" "You are only angry that they make you hope." The lantern flame wavered. He looked down. "Hope has taken plenty from me." Inez rubbed the calf's flank. "No, loss did." "Hope was only there when it happened." He did not answer, but the words stayed. She knew, because the next morning he took Sarah's tortoise-shell comb from the shelf and placed it in Ruth's small wooden box, where the girl kept buttons, feathers, and treasures. Ruth held it like a piece of light. By late March, the Army post contract came through. Benjamin and Inez hauled cedar posts to the road camp, where men in canvas coats counted and paid less than promised, as men often did when they could. Inez stood beside Benjamin with the ledger in hand and corrected their counts so calmly. The foreman paid the missing $3 rather than argue before his crew. Benjamin said nothing until they were driving home. Then he said, "You scared him." "I used arithmetic." "Same thing, I expect." She smiled into the wind. The money in the sugar bowl grew, not yet, but visible. Ruth counted it every Sunday after supper under Inez's supervision, moving coins into stacks, while Benjamin pretended not to watch with a tenderness that made the cabin warm, even when the fire lowered. Then Silas Vane arrived. He came on a gray afternoon with 2 men and a black carriage too fine for the road. Inez saw him from the garden patch, where she was turning soil with a hoe while Ruth searched for worms. Her uncle stepped down wearing a city coat, boots polished above the mud line, his mustache trimmed to a cruel point. The old fear knew his shape before her mind welcomed it. Benjamin was on the far slope repairing fence, too far to hear unless someone shouted. Silas removed his gloves finger by finger. "Inez." She set the hoe down. "Uncle." Ruth came to stand behind her. Silas looked at the child, then at the cabin, the curtains, the smoke, the garden patch. "So, this is what you chose?" "Ah, yes. A widower's ruin, and a bastard reputation." Ruth inhaled sharply. Inez stepped forward, placing herself between the child and the word. "Speak carefully." Silas smiled. "You forget your position." "I remember it exactly." One of the men behind him took a step. Hired muscle, heavy-shouldered, bored until needed. Silas reached into his coat and took out a paper. "You owe me $72 for room, board, clothing, and incidentals accrued after your mother died. I have an agreement for your employment in Portland, the wages to be paid against your debt." I signed no agreement. I asked your guardian. I signed. "I am 26. You were not when the debt began. Inez's mouth went dry. Not because the law was on his side. She doubted it was. But law cost money, and men like Silas knew how to make decency defend itself until it starved. Ruth whispered, Inez, go inside. Inez, inside. Ruth, the child ran. Silas watched her go. You always did gather pity like burrs. Inez looked toward the slope. Benjamin had seen the carriage. He was coming down fast. Silas followed her gaze and smiled. Ah, the mountain cowboy. Does he know what you are? Yes, Inez said. Hungry when he found me. Cold, angry, useful, more than you allowed. His face tightened. Benjamin reached the yard, breath hard from the run. He carried wire cutters in one hand. This man bothering you? He asked Inez, not Silas. My uncle. Benjamin's eyes did not leave her face. Do you want him here? No. Benjamin turned to Silas. You heard her. Silas laughed softly. Mr. Hale, I have legal claim. You have a carriage in my mud and 2 men standing too close to my house. Inez owes me money. How much? $72, Inez spun. Benjamin. No, but Benjamin had already started toward the cabin. She grabbed his sleeve. Do not pay him. He stopped. Her voice shook with fury and fear. You paid Beecham because I had no ground to stand on. I have ground now. Do not buy me like damaged stock. The words struck both men differently. Silas with annoyance. Benjamin with something like pain. He stepped back. Silas' eyes gleamed. Pride is expensive, child. Inez faced him. Her hands trembled, but they were not empty now. Soil darkened her palms. Behind her was a cabin she had cleaned, a child she had taught, bread she had baked, ledgers she had balanced, curtains she had hung, coffee she had poured before dawn. I will pay no false debt, she said. I will go nowhere with you. You will, or I will see your name ruined from here to Portland. Benjamin moved then, but Inez lifted a hand. No, she said. He stopped because she had asked him to. That obedience gave her more courage than any defense. Silas' voice lowered. You think this man will keep you when respectable people turn away? You think he will put his name beside yours? Benjamin said. He already has. Inez looked at him. Silas smiled. In what capacity? A cold wind moved through the yard, carrying the smell of thawing earth and horse sweat. Benjamin's face changed, not into anger, but into decision. He walked to the porch and lifted the iron triangle Ruth used to call supper. He struck it hard. The sound rang across the valley. Inez stared. Benjamin struck it again and again. From the barn, old hired hand Amos Bell, who had been helping with calving, came out wiping his hands. From the lower road, Sheriff Pike reined in his horse, drawn by the noise. Lydia Krause, riding in a small cart toward the ridge, halted at the gate. Even Beecham's delivery wagon stopped at the bend, the storekeeper craning his neck. Benjamin set the striker down. You want reputation, he said to Silas. Let's have witnesses. Inez's heart hammered. Benjamin, he looked at her, and his voice softened. Only if you choose it. She understood then. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to feel the road open beneath her feet. Silas scoffed. This is theater. Benjamin ignored him. Inez Hawthorne owes me nothing. She came here starving and trembling in snow, and since that night she has fed my child, kept my house, saved my accounts, earned money honest, delivered calves, defended herself, and made this place a home when I had let it become a roof over grief. Inez's eyes burned. He turned to the gathering faces. If any man says she is ruined, he says it against me. Lydia stepped from her cart, face pale. Silas clapped slowly, noble, yet meaningless. Benjamin took one breath, then another. A man at the edge of the cliff he had built inside himself. I am asking Inez Hawthorne to marry me, he said. Not to hide her, not to settle debt, not because winter forced her through my door. because I have seen who she is when no one is watching, and I would be honored to have my name stand with hers." The yard went silent. Ruth stood in the cabin doorway, both hands pressed to her mouth. Inez could hear the creek swollen with meltwater. She could hear a horse blowing softly near the gate. She could hear her own heart, frightened by the size of what had been placed gently before it. Benjamin looked only at her. No answer owed now. That saved her from the trap of spectacle. He had put his reputation down in public, but he had not demanded her hand as payment. Silas sneered, touching, "But unless marriage vows mint silver, the bank still owns your future." It was Lydia who spoke. "Mr. Vane," she said, voice sharp enough to cut cloth, "you are standing on private land insulting a woman under public witness. I suggest you leave before the sheriff remembers he is not only decorative." Sheriff Pike cleared his throat. "I remember." Beecham muttered something from the road, but did not come closer. Silas looked around and found no easy ally. His face hardened. "You will regret this, Inez." She stood straighter. "No, I have already regretted enough." Silas climbed into the carriage. His men followed. Mud splashed beneath the wheels as they left. Only after the carriage vanished did Inez realize her knees were weak. Benjamin stepped toward her, then stopped, letting her choose distance. "I did not mean to corner you," he said. "You didn't. I meant what I said. I know." Ruth ran from the porch and seized Benjamin's hand with one of hers and Inez with the other. "Say yes, Ruth," Benjamin said softly. "But she should." Inez knelt in the mud before the child. "Marriage is not a biscuit you take because it is warm." Ruth's eyes filled. "But you love us." The truth was there, plain and terrifying. Inez looked at Benjamin. His face held no demand, only the quiet fear of a man who had offered his whole unguarded side and expected weather. "I do," she said. Ruth's grip tightened. Inez stood. "But I will not be married to settle talk. I will not be paid for. I will not be hidden." Benjamin took off his hat. "No, and I will keep my mother's name inside whatever name I carry. Yes, and if I disagree with you, I will say so." At that, one corner of his mouth lifted. "I count on it." Lydia made a sound that might have been a laugh if she were less proud. Inez looked at the house, the blue curtains, the smoke, the table inside where bread dough waited beneath a cloth. She looked at Ruth's muddy hem, at Benjamin's hands, at the sugar bowl visible on the shelf through the open door. "Yes," she said, not loudly, not for the road, for him. Benjamin closed his eyes a moment. Then he opened them and nodded once, as if receiving something sacred and heavy. The wedding was 3 weeks later, after the banknote was paid. That happened because Lydia, who had more sorrow than softness, but not no conscience, came the next morning with Sarah's blue dishes wrapped in newspaper and a purse of coins. "I am not buying forgiveness," she said stiffly. Inez stood in the doorway. "Good." Lydia blinked. "Forgiveness bought cheap is not worth much," Inez said. Then she opened the door wider. "Coffee." Lydia looked past her to the table, where Ruth was writing sums and Benjamin was trying to look as if he had not been listening. "I take mine plain," Lydia said. "I know." No one spoke of apology until the second cup. Then Lydia set her hand on the table, fingers tight. "My sister would not have been ashamed," she said, not looking at anyone. "I was, because grief made me mean, and meanness likes a righteous dress." Ruth climbed into her lap without asking. Lydia held her as if the child might forgive what adults could not say properly. The bank took its payment in silver, cedar money, egg money, mending money, Lydia's loan, written clearly in Inez's ledger, and the sale of 2 young steers Benjamin had hoped to keep. He let them go without complaint, though Inez saw him stand by the empty pen that evening, one hand on the rail. She brought him coffee. "I'm sorry," she said. He took the cup. "Steers are easier to lose than people." The wedding took place at the little church in Mama, with mud still in the streets and snow holding high on the ridges. Inez wore a brown dress she had turned and fitted herself, with white cuffs made from flour sack cotton so finely stitched that Mrs. Tiller wept over them. Ruth wore a blue ribbon from Sarah's old curtains, cut from the inside hem where fading did not show. Benjamin wore his dark coat brushed clean, and if his hands trembled when he took Inez, no one kind mentioned it. When the preacher asked who gave the woman, Inez answered before anyone could move. "I do." There was a murmur, then a smile from Sheriff Pike, then a cough from Amos Bell that sounded suspiciously like approval. Benjamin's eyes warmed. He said his vows steady. Inez said hers with the clear voice of a woman who had crossed snow and shame and chosen her own threshold. Afterward, Beecham approached near the church steps, hat in hand, his wife glaring from behind him. "Mrs. Hale," he said. Inez held Benjamin's arm. The name was new, but not a chain. She had decided how to wear it. "Mr. Beecham." He shifted. "There might have been misunderstanding about that loaf." Benjamin went very still. Inez felt the old wound stir, then settle. There was hunger. There was a loaf. There was your son. Understanding came later. Beecham's ears reddened. "Caleb has gone to work with cousins in Salem. That seems wise. I have brought a gift." He held out a parcel of sugar wrapped in brown paper. "For your table." The blue sugar bowl flashed in Inez's mind. She accepted it after a pause. "Thank you." It was not full justice. The frontier rarely gave such clean things, but it was a public bend in a stiff neck, and sometimes that had to be enough for one morning. Spring widened the world. At the Hale Ranch, mud dried into paths. Inez planted beans, onions, and marigolds beside the cabin because flowers, she said, had work too. And that work was reminding people they were not livestock. Benjamin repaired the porch rail. Ruth painted the henhouse door with leftover whitewash and got more on herself than the boards. Lydia came Sundays with pies that no longer tasted of duty. The cabin changed by inches. Blue dishes on the shelf, curtains washed and rehung, a new rag rug by the stove. The tortoiseshell comb, kept in Ruth's box, but brought out sometimes when the girl asked to hear about her mother. The sugar bowl sat in the center of the table, filled now not always with sugar, but with buttons, coins, folded notes, and once a wildflower Ruth insisted was treasure. Inez did not become soft in the way some people mean when they think love should quiet a woman. She still corrected Benjamin's sums. She still climbed when she should not. She still answered gossip with a level gaze that made gossip feel poorly dressed. But she slept deeper. She ate without measuring every bite against tomorrow's fear. She laughed more often, especially when Benjamin tried to make biscuits and failed in new and interesting ways. Benjamin changed too. He did not heal all at once. Some nights the old dream took him, and he woke with Sarah's name in the room like smoke. Inez would rise, stir the stove, and sit beside him without asking him to become unbroken for her comfort. One such night, rain tapped softly at the roof instead of snow. Benjamin sat at the table, head bowed, hands open around a cup gone cold. "I loved her," he said. "I know, I love you. I know that too." He looked up, startled by the lack of fear in her voice. Inez reached across the table and turned his cup in his hands. "Love is not a cupboard with one shelf." He held her gaze for a long while. Then he covered her hand with his. In summer, the road that had nearly killed Inez filled with wagons again. Families passed toward Oregon City, dusty and hopeful, wheels creaking, children walking barefoot beside tired oxen. Sometimes a woman would stop at the Hale place asking for water. Inez always gave bread too if she had it. Benjamin never asked whether they could spare it. He only brought another chair to the porch. One evening, when the sun lowered gold through the firs and the mountains stood blue beyond the pasture, Inez set supper on the table. Beans with salt pork, warm bread, stewed apples, coffee, and a small dish of sugar because Ruth had declared it a company night, though no company had come. Benjamin washed at the basin and came in smelling of hay and soap. Ruth placed the blue dishes carefully, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The repaired fence caught the sunset outside the window. The marigolds nodded by the step. The stove held a steady, gentle heat. On the peg by the door hung Benjamin's coat, the same one he had wrapped around Inez in the snow, patched now at the cuff by her hand. Ruth climbed into her chair. "Are we saying grace?" Benjamin looked at Inez. She looked at the table, at the bread that did not have to be hidden, at the sugar bowl filled with honest sweetness, at the man who had not saved her by making her small, but by standing beside her, until she could stand fully herself. "Yes," she said. "But first, pass your uncle the butter before his biscuit turns to stone." Benjamin looked wounded. Ruth giggled. Inez smiled and poured the coffee. There are storms that take a body to its knees, and there are hands that do not pull a person up so much as remind them their legs still belong to them. Inez Hawthorne came to that mountain rose starving and trembling, with nothing left but a cracked sugar bowl and a name she refused to surrender. Benjamin Hale did not change everything by being perfect. He changed it by opening a door, keeping the coffee warm, listening when silence spoke, and learning that love is sometimes a warm stove, a defended name, and one more plate set at the table when the snow begins to fall.